1300.
This is the primary audio
I just like sometimes you're just sitting here and you're like, I just want to make sure, I just want to look at a little thing that says it's okay. just trying to get something straight.
Dave, I'm going to hold up with figures in this. Yes, the road queue, I'll be holding up the mirror like this, and I'll read the headlines: loyalty, respect, love. did, Savannah. We're going to be saying this on many days to come, but this is an historic day. The British newspapers this morning that yesterday were emblazoned with pictures of the Queen, now full of pictures of the new king. The Daily Mail saying tearful Charles' tribute to his darling mama, while the Daily Mirror looking at his pledge to his people, our new king's pledge to the nation, royalty, respect, and love.
So up to pen.
Do we go from the queue?
It's in order. I think you're before. You could say no.
Can I now begin to start with Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley?
Thank you. All right.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law.
Just wait. Okay. Just trust me.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law.
The oath and the King James.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
You can keep those. Keep them.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
This is the same. You have to ask.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
It's got this Scottish in, but with this Bible. This Bible.
I do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
I do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
So it's Welsh, Welsh, English and Welsh. Okay.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God. Yr wyf yn datgan a chadarnhau yn ddifrifol yn ddifiant ac yn ddidwyll y byddaf yn ffyddlon ac yn wir derfgar yn fawrydru y Brenin Charles I etifeddion a'i olynwyr yn ôl y ddeddf.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
So he needs to stop and do this. Is it affirmation? It's doing its oath and
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors according to law, so help me God.
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
I don't know, is that right? We have to keep this one. Bible, please. Thank you.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors according to law, so help me God.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors according to law, so help me God.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors according to law. So help me God.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
Thank you.
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
Order. I shall now invite the House to resume its tributes to Her late Majesty. I expect to conclude tributes up till 10 o'clock, and at that time I shall invite the Minister to move the motion for a humble address to His Majesty. 182 members contributed yesterday. I know many want to do so today. I hope, therefore, that members will keep to the informal time limit of no more than 3 minutes. I now invite the Deputy Prime Minister, Dr. Therese Coffey.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank you for allowing government ministers to be able to participate in this debate today. I really do appreciate it, and I know that my constituents from Suffolk Coastal will do so too. The constancy that Her late Majesty the Queen gave us through decades, whether as a child, it was personally with the Silver Jubilee, and indeed all the celebrations that we had for Golden, the Diamond, and in particular, most recently, the Platinum, as well as all the commemorations of E-Day, and moments when the Queen brought this nation together, both recognising sad times, as well as those points at the cenotaph, but also the celebration of what makes our country great. Just thinking about my mother, the very first time she watched television was when the coronation happened, and somebody in her town of Wrexham nearby bought a TV, and people piled in from around the surrounding streets in order to watch the princess, of course, the Queen by then, be crowned. But that impact goes right around the world, and I saw that when I was an environmental minister, and indeed whether it was in Kenya, Uganda, wherever I went, certainly the Queen was held in the highest regards, and there were always representations made for her. But that sort of impact actually happened during World War II as well. You know, if I think about the broadcast that happened by the princesses, I remember a long time ago, in 1995, when I went to, as a representative of the United Kingdom as a youth, we went to the Anne Frank house, and there were pictures of the princesses. And indeed, in the Anne Frank diary of the 21st of April, 1944, Anne Frank referred to the 18th birthday of the then Princess, Her Royal House Princess Elizabeth of York, but along the lines of not only wishing her birthday, but also wondering which prince they will marry this beauty off to. But that sort of constancy and impact around the world is something that I am confident that our new sovereign king will have as well, not only for his work on the environment, but also continuing the sincere traditions of his mother. Turning to Suffolk Coastal and the impact there, well, I will always pay tribute to the savvy parish councils, Rendlesham Parish Council, who always put their parish fete on the same day as the Trooping the Colour, because we get the lineup of all the fly-past coming through the Suffolk Coastal constituency, whereas many other places pay for it. But there seemed to be a particular affection to Benjamin Britten and opera music, and in terms of the Queen opened Snake Maltings and the 20th Festival in 1967, and when it burnt down just a couple of years later, she came back in effect to reopen it as well. And that affection carried on, and I think it was that love of music that we may not have always seen so self-evident. But indeed, people will know in this chamber and elsewhere the special arrangement of the national anthem that Benjamin Britten wrote. And that was then further testified by the fact that the Queen authorised the name of only one other person on the coinage of the realm. That was Benjamin Britten. In terms of, Mr. Speaker, I want to say on behalf of the people of Suffolk Coastal how much they will miss Queen Elizabeth II, but also pledge their loyalty and support to King Charles III. Thank you.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the Accession Council met to proclaim the new sovereign, His Majesty King Charles III, and it was an immense honour to bear witness to that historic proclamation for the Privy Council, but also for my constituents in Normanton, Pontefract, Castleford and Nottingley. And for us in Pontefract, it's particularly important to mark the arrival of the new King, who, as Prince, has been a huge supporter of the Prince of Wales Hospice in Pontefract. And an association we hope considerably more positive than our last constituency connection with the accession of a monarch, which involved Pontefract Castle, Richard II, and a rather unfortunate end. Mr. Speaker, it's an honour today to speak in the second day of tributes to Her Majesty, to a truly remarkable Queen. And everyone has their memories. For one of my constituents, it was
parcels from the young Princess Elizabeth sent in 1947, sharing across the country wedding gifts. She said, "I've always remembered it. There was a pineapple in it and we didn't know what it was." And for those of us children in the 1970s, it was the Silver Jubilee. The Queen meant street parties for us, and everyone made such a big fuss of it being 25 years, we frankly thought she'd already been Queen forever. And that's what she was, for us and subsequent generations, our forever Queen, the constant who would serve our country for another 45 years. And right honourable members for Peckham, for Doncaster North, for Chingford have all described how when they became Privy Councillors and when they left their office, she invited them to tea once they'd left their job. And the remarkable thing is, she did it for dozens of us. Every departing cabinet minister or party leader. And I was invited after the 2010 election. We drank tea. She asked me how we had managed with the kids as being cabinet ministers. And I said chaotically. And we talked about housing as well. And others have described the kindness that she showed in those meetings, but I think it was much more than that. She didn't invite us when we were on the way up. She didn't invite us when we were playing a constitutional role. She only invited us when it was all over and when the cameras had gone home. And most of us don't like to talk about our downfall, and so most people never knew she even held those teas. And I said then, it was very kind of you to do this. She said it was to recognise and to say thank you for public service. And that said much more about her than it did for the service that any of her cabinet ministers had shown, because it showed how privately, even more than publicly, she believed in selfless duty and valuing public service to our country. And yes, she showed that sense of mischief. And I think no one has told the story that so many of us must have heard John Prescott, the Lord Prescott, tell of his first Privy Council meeting with Claire Short, who was International Development Secretary at the time, and who, according to John, had arrived late with a large handbag and a pile of papers. And as they stood to hear the Privy Council business read out, suddenly Claire's phone began to ring. And Claire rummaged fast, was unable to find it in her handbag before the noise eventually subsided. The call went unanswered, and the Queen simply said, "Oh dear, I do hope that wasn't anyone important." And rightly, many members paid tribute yesterday to the address that the Queen gave just 2 weeks into the first lockdown. Thousands of people had already died, thousands more were being rushed to hospital, unable to breathe. Schools were closed, families were split up, churches, mosques, synagogues, all shut. Parliament had closed, and the Prime Minister was very ill. And all of the institutions we relied on and took for granted were either closed or under strain, except for the Queen. And only the Queen, our forever Queen, who had been a constant through ups and downs, could give us that message. But it wasn't just her authority in invoking those wartime sacrifices. She captured the yearning of a country to come together just as we needed to stay apart. And she invoked those British values that I want to finish with, Mr. Speaker. The attributes of self-discipline, of quiet, good-humoured resolve, and of fellow feeling still characterise this country. The words she used to describe us, but the words so many of us have used to describe her. And that's why she was so important to us, because she embodied the values that we want to see still as British: the resilience, the strength, the kindness, the fairness, the common decency, the determined optimism that things will get better because we will make them so, and that selfless duty to commitment to public service. She held up a mirror to our nation of what we want to be. She may not be the forever Queen that I still believed in at that Silver Jubilee, but those values that she stood up for were forever values, and those are her legacy now.
Yeah. Amanda Milling.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My thoughts and prayers, and those of my Cannock Chase constituents, are with His Majesty the King and all the royal family who have lost a much-loved mother, grandmother and great-grandmother. For us, we've lost a Queen who dutifully served our country through every high and low that we have faced. From war to the pandemic, Her late Majesty has remained the constant, providing quiet but steadfast leadership and showing that whatever we face, our great country can come together. I, like many members of this House, had the real privilege to meet the Queen. The first time I met the Queen was when I was appointed Deputy Chief Whip. We've heard from several former whips during these tributes about the various duties that are undertaken. My first meeting with the Queen was for wand swapping, the exchange of the wands of office between the outgoing and the incoming deputy. Mr. Speaker, now members who know me well in this House will know that I'm not known for being very quiet, but I was so nervous. I was really worried I was going to mess up all the protocols. So, ahead of going in, I just went totally silent. And there were colleagues and friends there, including my right honourable friend, the member for Pudsey, who was a bit baffled and turned around and went, "Gosh, where's Amanda gone?" But as many members have remarked on, she had an amazing ability to put you at ease, including that smile. The length and breadth of our country, the Queen was loved and admired, including in Cannock Chase. But this love and admiration stretched across the world, something that I personally saw on overseas visits. And of course, Mr. Speaker, this is true for our overseas territories, a number of which I've visited in the past year. Whether, Mr. Speaker, in a snowstorm at Goose Green in the Falklands, where we both were, or in the heat of Anguilla, you could not help being moved every time the national anthem was played. You could see and feel the admiration felt by the people of the overseas territories. For those of us in this place, we chose to go into public life because we want to make our great country better for those that we serve. And in Her late Majesty, we could not have had a better example to follow. Her unparalleled record of public service stood as an inspiration. We have been lucky to have her wise counsel and calm leadership over the past 70 years. For the country and around the world, Her late Majesty was a figurehead for all that the United Kingdom represents. I offer His Majesty the King and his family my heartfelt condolences and the condolences of my Cannock Chase constituents. As we all mourn the loss of Queen Elizabeth II, we know that His Majesty the King had an excellent mentor and he will continue her great legacy. God save the King.
Yeah. Sir George Howarth.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Her Majesty the Queen embodied a shining example of duty, a sympathy and understanding of the people of our country and the Commonwealth and beyond, an exceptional good judgment. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have to confess that I've not always felt supportive of the principle of the monarchy. As a young local councillor, I once attended a function at which the loyal toast to the Queen was proposed. Foolishly, I declined to take part, remaining firmly in my seat. My non-participation led to comment in our local paper and a strong backlash from the people I represented. I learned two lessons from that episode. The first was that unnecessary courting of controversy was not a good thing to do. And secondly, that the people held our constitutional monarchy and the Queen in particular in enormous respect and affection. One question I was asked at the time was, so what is your alternative? And I have to confess I struggled to find an answer. By the time I was elected to this House more than a decade later, I'd come to the view that Her Majesty and the monarchy were a much valued part of our national life. Her dedication and sense of duty in the ensuing years has served to strongly confirm me in that view.
Rand Shapps.
Mr. Speaker, like many in this House, I had the opportunity to both meet and speak to the Queen on numerous different occasions, but unfortunately the relationship didn't start particularly auspiciously. I was invited to Buckingham Palace for what other members will know is an ancient and complex process of becoming a Privy Councillor, so complicated that I was called to a side room with 5 colleagues to have the process explained. It seemed that we would enter into a large hall in Buckingham Palace, Her Majesty would stand at one end, and we were told we would kneel on red cushions, going back some distance on our right knees, holding a Bible in our right hands. Then we would switch that to our left hands, then take the Sovereign's hand with our right hand and brush her hand, and then stand and say, "Your Majesty." Brush her hand. Was that an instruction to brush her hand with my hand or my sleeve or a handkerchief? And as about I was to ask, we were called in to the actual performance of the great ceremony itself. No matter, I thought. I was 5th in the line to become a Privy Councillor. I would watch my colleagues, each of whom were swearing on the New Testament. I'm Jewish, I was swearing on the Old Testament. I was at the back of this line, I would watch what was happening. Unfortunately, as we went into this very large hallway, it was so long that I couldn't see what was happening, the ceremony at the front. And as I got closer, the field of view narrowed and the girth of my colleague in front of me widened. And I still couldn't see what brushing the hand actually entailed. And now, with palpitations and nervously, I knelt in front of Her Majesty the Queen on the red cushion right before her. I switched the Bible, the Pentateuch, from the right to the left hand, stretched out my right hand. She stretched out her bare, ungloved right hand, and to my surprise, moved it towards my face. It moved towards my lips. I pursed my lips. It stuck. And then, in what felt like an age, she was trying to pull it away, and then suddenly, her hand pulled away. I wanted the ground beneath me in Buckingham Palace to swallow me whole, but I remembered to stand up. "Your Majesty," I quavered. She looked me right in the eyes with those wonderful, sparkling eyes, and as if both to acknowledge what had happened and also to forgive me in one turn. She said, "Yes." Mr. Speaker, we never spoke of it again. God save the King.
Siobhan MacDonald.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I never expected to be called so early. I was so enjoying everybody's contribution. I rise to pay my respects on behalf of my constituents in Mitcham and Morden, who, like the rest of our country and Commonwealth, are united in mourning. So much has been said in this House, and indeed from pubs to podiums around the world, and yet such is the magnitude of the moment that it still feels like there is so much left to say. Queen Elizabeth was the historic figurehead of modern times, a leader, a female leader, may I say, so incomparably devoted to her service and her people. As the longest reigning monarch, she has been ever present, a constant figure of reassurance throughout all our lives. Perhaps that is why the grief feels so personal for so many. Her Majesty's leadership transcended generations. She navigated a century of societal changes from her coronation in post-war Britain to every move of her reign televised globally and across social media. It was this insight that best shared her wonderful sense of humour, with treasured memories of Olympic ceremony skydives and more recently of afternoon tea and teacup drumming with Paddington Bear. She truly was a leader for all ages, respected and admired by young and old. Other members have spoken at length of her dedication and duty. It was this work ethic that I admired most. with her service continuing quite literally until the end as she welcomed her 15th and final Prime Minister just days before her death. What a remarkable drive she had. I suspect there must have been many times through 7 decades of service when a stiff upper lip was required, but even in the darkest hours, she steadfastly believed that you just have to keep going, a quality of true leadership. Her Majesty had an unrivalled ability to unite, even at times of deepest division. Perhaps that's why we trusted her. She was our great nation's guide through good times and bad. As a country, we looked to her for reassurance, and most recently in the coronavirus lockdowns. And when she said that we would meet again, we trusted the century of experience that she was drawing upon. Her Platinum Jubilee showed the love that our country had for her and sparked the togetherness, community and patriotism that she consistently inspired. She was so proud of her country and Commonwealth, and we were so proud of her. So we say thank you for 70 years of service, stewardship and extraordinary stoicism. May she rest in peace.
Sir John Redmond.
Mr. Speaker, we meet together in mourning. And once again, our late Queen has united the nation. But this time, unfortunately, she has united us in grief at our common sense of loss. We here in Parliament suspend our differences, our party and our political views, because something so large has happened. That constant in our national life, who has always been our Queen, is no more. And all those of us here who are all privileged to have supporting roles in public life have learned a great deal from observing just how well the Queen carried out all her public service over the years. Everyone here has met her at invitation at Buckingham Palace or at a national event in London, or maybe hosted her in their constituency. Some of us had the honour on many occasions to be with her and see her. And I think what always came across to all of us is just how much she respected every person and every institution that she visited. And she showed that respect by impeccable manners and great courtesy, always on time, always properly briefed, always appropriately dressed for the occasion. But as so many have said from their personal experiences, there was something so much more than this. She was not just the consummate professional at those public events, but there was the warmth, spirit, the personality, and above all, that understanding that everyone else at that event was terrified that something was going to go wrong, or that they hadn't understood the protocol, or that there was some magic way of doing it, as my right honourable friend was explaining, that they had to get right. But in the public events, the Queen always relaxed people and showed them there was no right way, because she was there for the people, she was there for the institution, she was there for the event, and that is what we can learn from. Now, of course, she was also our Majesty. She was the embodiment of the sovereignty of people and Parliament. She represented us so well abroad, and she represented us at home, knowing that as a constitutional monarch, she represented us when we were united. She spoke for those times when we were gloriously happy and celebrating, or she spoke for those times when there was misery and gloom and she had to deal with our grief and point to the better tomorrow. That was why she held that sovereignty so well and for so long. A constitutional monarch who did not exercise the power but captured the public mood, who managed to deal with factious and difficult parliaments and different political leaders, but who was above the politics and meant that our constitution was safe in her hands. I wish her son and the new king every success in following that great lead, as he has told us he will do, and can with others say today, God save the King.
Yeah. Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very humbling to follow so many great speeches. On my own behalf and on behalf of my Edinburgh South West constituents, I too am rising to honour the memory of our late Queen. Much has been said of her dedication and her service, but I want to concentrate on her love of Scotland and the love of many Scots for her. Because the Queen died at Balmoral and is to be taken first to the Palace of Holyrood House and then to St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, Scotland will be the centre of the world's attention over the next few days. This is breaking with tradition, but these were the Queen's wishes and Scotland is honoured by them. The last monarch to die in Scotland was James V, who died at Falkland in 1542. He was, of course, the father of Mary, Queen of Scots, and it was her son, James VI, who presided over the union of the crowns. Mary, Queen of Scots, is the ancestor of all the Stuarts and indeed all the Hanoverians who followed. Elizabeth Stuart, the daughter of James VI, married one of the German electors, and with the demise of the last Stuart monarch in 1714, Elizabeth's grandson succeeded to the British throne. That's the Hanoverian line, and it can be traced directly back to Scotland's Stuarts. Our late Queen was keenly aware of this. Perhaps that's why she chose Stuart names for her first two children, Charles and Anne. And of course, her mother was a Scot. In 1953, after her coronation, the first place our late Queen visited was Edinburgh. And throughout her reign, she returned to Scotland for important events, and indeed, she chose my country to be centre stage during state visits. In 1962, she chose Scotland for the state visit of the King of Norway, and in 2010, very memorably for many people of my faith, she chose Holyrood for the state visit of Pope Benedict XVI. And of course, she officially opened Scotland's Parliament when it was reconvened in 1999. Our late Queen, I believe, embodied the union of the English and the Scottish crowns, which of course is quite different from the union of the parliaments and predates it by over 100 years. At a time of change, there are many in my country, particularly younger people, who might prefer a republic to a constitutional monarchy, but that did not in any way prevent the affection our late Queen held for Scotland from being returned in equal measure. Sadly, I never had the privilege of meeting Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen of Scots, but earlier this year I did have the privilege of meeting our new King. We spoke of Scotland and I was left in no doubt that he shared his mother's abiding love of my country. So before I resume my seat, in honour of his late mother, I want to recite just a few words of Burns' poetry, which I believe may be a favourite of the King. Farewell to the mountains, high covered with snow. Farewell to the straths and green valleys below. Farewell to the forests and wild hanging woods. Farewell to the torrents and loud pouring floods. My heart's in the highlands, my heart is not here. My heart's in the highlands chasing the deer. Chasing the wild deer and following the roe. My heart's in the highlands wherever I go. May she rest in peace.
Andrew Mitchell.
For all the pomp and tradition, Her late Majesty's true magic was in her humility. She did not need a gilded throne or royal regalia to touch people. It was in her smile, her poise, her natural charm, understated yet reassuring, the best of Britain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to make this brief tribute on behalf of the royal town of Sutton Coldfield, a royal town now for 494 years, who at this sad time unite with the rest of the country in shared sorrow. The Queen's visit to the 9th World Scout Jamboree held in Sutton Park in 1957 is still remembered by my older constituents, as she came to join in the celebrations for the 50th anniversary of Scouting and had lunch in our magnificent town hall. And Mr. Speaker, I have never visited a primary school where one of the first questions hasn't been, have you met the Queen? I had the privilege and good fortune to meet the Queen when I was her International Development Secretary. Like millions around the world, I will never forget every second of those meetings. She was intensely interested in the less developed members of the Commonwealth. She was the reason the Commonwealth not only survived, it flourished and grew, reaching out to unexpected parts of the world, with Rwanda enthusiastically joining. And at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting held in June this year in Rwanda, I watched the binding power of the monarchy as the King, as he now is, spoke on behalf of Her late Majesty of the ideals and values she inspired and to which so many nations now aspire. In Kigali, the capital of one of the Commonwealth's youngest countries, The national flag and the flag of the East African community are today flying at half-mast and will continue to do so until the Queen's funeral. I also remember travelling for many hours in Uganda to the hospital in Masaka, run by an 80-year-old sister of the Medical Missionaries of Mary, who had recently received the OBE from the Queen for her 50 years of service. And in the hospital entrance hung a huge picture of the President of Uganda, Mr. Museveni, alongside an equally huge one of Her Majesty, the head of the Commonwealth. Tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, in the royal town of Sutton Coldfield, we will hold a service of remembrance in our town church, Holy Trinity, followed by a reading of today's proclamation. And we will mourn the loss of our great Queen, who meant so much to us all.
James?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like other members, my main memories of Her late Majesty the Queen are of visits to my constituency. In 1987, I was chair of Newham Council's Planning Committee, and I negotiated with Molan's the terms of its planning permission for London City Airport. I attended the opening by Her Majesty in November 1987. It was pointed out that the terminal at the airport was on the site from which her grandfather had opened the King George V dock in 1921, 66 years before. The airport was controversial locally. It turned out that most local residents, still smarting from the economic damage of the closure of the docks 10 years earlier, welcomed the jobs it was bringing. But some were very unhappy, understandably, about living with the noise of the planes. On the day of the airport opening, there was a small demonstration. The airport management, rightly wanting to avoid unnecessary ill-feeling, invited half a dozen demonstrators inside and gave them the chance to meet the Queen and to set out their case. When it came to their turn, the residents explained their fears about aircraft noise. The Queen listened very carefully to what they had to say, and then she replied, "I know exactly what you mean. You should hear the noise at Windsor Castle of the jets coming into land at Heathrow." The Prime Minister said yesterday that Her late Majesty had a unique ability to transcend difference and heal division. Well, that's what she did on that occasion. Her off-the-cuff response transformed the situation, arriving as disgruntled outsiders. The residents, by the time they'd left, were insiders who'd shared a moment of recognition and warmth with their head of state. The rancour between the objectors and the airport was, I think, permanently eased. The day after the opening ceremony for London 2012, which was a Saturday, when you might have thought that after the night before, the then 86-year-old monarch would have been entitled to a day off, the Queen returned to London City Airport to mark its 25th anniversary. Other memorable visits included, in her Golden Jubilee tour, her visit to Green Street, the most successful Asian shopping street in the country, we claim, where she was greeted by enthusiastic women in colourful saris waving Union Jacks, creating wonderful photographs in the Daily Mail the next day. And we always remember her opening what we now call Newham University Hospital in December 1983. Her reign, Mr. Speaker, was 7 decades. Those treasured memories will last for many decades still.
Debbie Green.
Like many others, I suspect, my initial reaction on hearing of the Queen's death was not just sadness and regret, but a peculiar sense of uncertainty. How could the world continue without this magnificent woman playing a central role in the background of all our lives? But also, like many others, I was lucky and privileged enough to meet the Queen a number of times and can add to the testimonies of many other members about her warmth, kindness, vast depth of knowledge, absolutely razor-sharp mind, and fabulously dry sense of humour. And my best evidence of the latter was another Privy Council meeting, not, I'm happy to report to my right honourable friend from Welling Hatfield, his. But as he said, a council takes place whenever a new member is appointed. And this involves, as we've heard, a lot of kneeling, moving, kneeling again, holding a Bible, kissing, and talking. Now, politicians are good at words, but many of them are not very good at choreography. And I vividly remember one meeting where somebody got it wrong, badly wrong. There was chaos. My right honourable friend was nothing on that. As you can imagine, this provoked silent but extreme hilarity and glee among all the close friends of this poor wretch who was getting it very, very badly wrong. And I looked across, and the Queen's face was completely impassive. But the look in her eyes told me that the person biting their tongue hardest in that room was Her Majesty. One of her greatest personal attributes was that despite being royal all her life and a monarch for 70 years, she didn't have a trace of self-regarding pomposity. But her many personal attributes were not enough to make her a great leader. She had so much more than that to give. Particularly, she had a genius for necessary reform, for taking an ancient institution of huge importance and changing it little by little so that it stayed relevant in fast-moving times. She enabled the monarchy to remain ancient and modern. It's an extraordinary historic achievement. And even in the last 48 hours, we've seen that the new king is proceeding on the same path. The television of the Accession Council, the unexpected walkabout at Buckingham Palace yesterday. These tell us that King Charles will both preserve the traditions of the monarchy while keeping it fit for the 21st century and beyond. So we can be assured that we will continue to have a people's monarchy. There can be no greater tribute to the late Queen and no better platform for the new king that we can say with great confidence, God save the king.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So many of us are trying to find the words to describe the reign of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Many of us have eloquently, philosophically, emotionally, and even poetically alluded to her legacy and her reign. But despite all the great words we have had to say, or will say, we all fall short, not because of lack of words or heartfelt emotion to speak on this momentous occasion, but because even our greatest words fall short in doing justice to the life, legacy and the reign of this extraordinary monarch. We look around the world and we realise that these are not just sombre moments for the people of Britain or the Commonwealth, but for the entire world. Indeed, the words of President Macron of France, which eloquently stated, "To you, she was your queen. To us, she was the Queen," highlights how she was a worldly figure that existed beyond the nations and realms, in the hearts of all people from across the world. She was a unified monarch who brought together people in a way that was unique only to her. This is why, when we look across our nation at the sadness and the grief people and communities are feeling, we see that people of all races, of all religions and all communities are united in the devotion and heartfelt emotion they are showing at the passing of their Queen. This unified attachment to Her Majesty did not just appear out of nowhere, but was directly a symbol she expressed throughout her reign. In 1952, in her first Christmas broadcast, at a time when inclusion and diversity were very much unseen in society, she addressed the nations and asked that people, whatever their religion may be, to pray for her and her reign. The same message of inclusivity and diversity we heard yesterday from our new king, King Charles III. In the same way, despite Her Majesty keeping her views close to her heart, it was obvious to see her deep-felt connection to the Commonwealth and to justice. By the summer of 1986, it was widely known about the Queen's apparent objection to the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher for Britain's refusal to place sanctions on apartheid South Africa. It is no wonder that her favourite African leader was Nelson Mandela, who she held a deep friendship with until he sadly passed. On a more local front, the Queen took several visits and was welcomed by the people of Bradford throughout her 70-year reign. 18 months after her coronation, on her nationwide tour, she visited Bradford, marking the city's first royal visit since 1942. The Queen visited Bradford Park Avenue during this trip and was sang to by 30,000 school children. On behalf of all my constituents, I hope I can today express their thoughts, feelings and condolences to the royal family at this difficult time. As one era comes to an end, we pray for the next. As a woman of faith, I admired Her Majesty as she was a person of deep faith and belief. And I end the words of the great Muslim poet Rumi. He says, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are an entire ocean in a drop." Her Majesty was an ocean in her kindness, selflessness and humour, and she made herself a drop through her humbleness, sense of duty and service to her people. God save our King.
Greg Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in the town of Royal Tunbridge Wells and the wider borough of Tunbridge Wells loved Her late Majesty, and on behalf of us all, I express our gratitude for her life of service. In Royal Tunbridge Wells, we have a very special connection through Mr. Harry Collins, who for 22 years has been the personal jeweller to Her late Majesty, responsible for the care of her jewels and for designing and making some of the new pieces that have been so admired around the world during that time. I had coffee with Mr. Collins this morning, and his devotion to Her late Majesty is absolute, and he is much too discreet to break any confidences. But I did read, however, that his appointment survived, having fallen flat on top of one of the Queen's corgis when attempting to follow protocol by walking backwards during one of his early consultations. Now, one of the high points of my life was, as many right honourable members have expressed, was meeting Her Majesty to be sworn in to the Privy Council for the first time, as I was in 2010. And we've heard already this morning and yesterday some of the hazards of that. And it is so overwhelming is that moment that I understand that men have suddenly been moved to curtsy in front of Her Majesty. And otherwise capable people have swayed on the footstool while trying to kneel on one knee, holding up a Bible in one hand, and to recite the oath at the same time. And of course, the one person who didn't mind, as has been said, was Her Majesty herself, who put everyone at their ease. So one of the reasons that I will always be grateful to my right honourable friend, the member for Uxbridge, is in reappointing me to the Cabinet again this summer. I was able to swear the oath of office to Her Majesty in person herself on the 8th of July at Windsor Castle. And when I shook Her Majesty's hand, I was greeted with the most dazzling 1,000-watt smile, sparkling eyes that suggested that she was absolutely thrilled to see me. Now, I strongly suspect, Mr. Speaker, that Her Majesty's demeanour did not reflect the fulfilment of a 3-year hope that the Prime Minister would restore me to office. Instead, it showed that at the age of 96, on a hot summer's afternoon, Her Majesty still recognised that for everyone she met, it was a moment that they would treasure forever. And in a second, it revealed her personal kindness and adherence to the highest of standards right to the last. Across the world, over 70 years, hundreds of thousands of people have been treated with such kindness and thoughtfulness by Her Majesty the Queen. Her life was one of constant, devoted and selfless service. We are blessed that she reigned over us. May she rest in peace, and God save the King.
Come on, James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had, like many, the great privilege of meeting the Queen as a member of the Privy Council, Defence Minister and a member of this House. I remember the first time I met her, not long after being first elected to this House in 2001. A number of us were invited to meet Her Majesty, and you can imagine we were all very nervous and apprehensive about the visit. But as many have said in these tributes, that once we met her, she made us feel at ease. She asked questions about our backgrounds and was interested in our constituencies. The other thing that struck me, Mr. Speaker, was I think an encyclopedic knowledge of different parts of the United Kingdom. Mention has already been made in these tributes to a dedication to our armed forces. And it wasn't simply because she was head of the armed forces, it's because she was a real devotion, an understanding of their role. I think that came from somebody who'd served herself. But I've got to say, Mr. Speaker, it went beyond that. And I think the best example I can give is when I was Veterans Minister, was a decision to award the Elizabeth Cross in 2009 to the next of kin of those who'd lost loved ones in the service of their country. And can I just attest, this was not a popular decision among certain parts of the establishment. But for me, what it showed about her was that she recognised the important role of families play and continue to play in supporting those who we ask to serve in the members of our armed forces. For many of us, including many of my North Durham constituents, the Queen has been that constant presence in our lives, in what we all know has been and continues to be an increasingly changing world. But she had those two things that I think are important. Dedication to service were the central tenets of her reign. And some in this cynical age may dismiss them as being old-fashioned and part of a bygone age. But I would disagree with that, because the cynicism of those that aim to divide us, I think, need reminding of what she used and led by example in saying that we are individuals, we have differences, but if we work together, despite those differences, it makes us all stronger. Yesterday we sat in this chamber and listened to our new King's address to the nation. What is clear, despite his grief and the huge responsibility which now rests on his shoulders, that dedication and duty to service will continue, which was so excellently exemplified by the late Queen. God save the King.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is an honour to have this opportunity to offer my condolences, those of my family and of my constituents, to His Majesty the King and to the royal family, and to pay tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. As with many others, I was privileged to meet her a number of times, and it was easy to be intimidated by what she was, but never by who she was. With the authority, there was always great warmth. Mr. Speaker, we've heard many eloquent tributes in the last 48 hours, but perhaps none have been quite so eloquent as the faces of the people we have all seen on the streets. Those faces show the struggle of her subjects to reconcile the feelings of grief, gratitude and pride we all share for the life and work of our late Queen. Grief because of the scale of our national loss, but also more personally because we relied on her constancy to anchor our own lives, to an extent that many of us are only now beginning to realise. Grief too because we no longer have the remarkable individual fulfilling this uniquely challenging role. The task of modern monarchy looks impossible. To encapsulate all that is good about a nation, a family of nations, and to celebrate its diversity while drawing it together. To be looked to set the tone at every moment of collective joy and disaster, and also to share the best and worst moments of your own life with the country and with the world. And in meeting that challenge, Queen Elizabeth II was a breathtaking example of servant leadership for 70 years, making the impossible look effortless and maintaining an irrepressible sense of humour throughout. And it is for that leadership that we feel such gratitude among our sadness, delivered by this most exemplary of British monarchs in the most British of styles, with resilience and dignity and without drama or fuss, with service to others as a primary and persistent vocation, however hard the task or the events of her own life. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, not always happy, but always glorious. And Mr. Speaker, this was majesty indeed. And so we are also proud that we were privileged to live in this second Elizabethan age, proud that for so much of our recent history, our nation was personified by the monarch we mourn today. Her loss is great, but her legacy is greater. A country, a people, and a commonwealth immeasurably better for her long and faithful service to us all.
Yeah. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It is an honour to be paying tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth on behalf of my constituents in North East Fife in this place. And as a relatively new MP, it is easy to feel overwhelmed by the history of this place and the events that it has seen, and never more so than today when considering the Queen's life, of her dedication and of her work. I feel, as I know many do, unanchored. We were all Elizabethans, for the majority of us without realisation or acknowledgement, and no matter our views on the monarchy, the Queen was there, our constant through ever-changing times. We have seen both a jolting and an imperceptible change in the filter of our lives. QC to KC, future King's speeches that will take place in this speech, the singing of God Save the King. Given the current line of succession, it is unlikely that any one of us here will see a reigning Queen again in our lifetimes. Now, like other members, I want to pay tribute to the Queen's service, her dedication to the nations of the UK and the Commonwealth and to their citizens, and her commitment to her people, because for us in Scotland, she was our Queen of Scots, the Scots as a people, and we know her love of Scotland as a place of beauty, escape and of peace. And I trust that she found some of that beauty and peace on her visits to North East Fife. Fife is known as the Kingdom of Fife, recognising its religious and royal heritage, including that of St Andrews, named for our nation's patron saint, and of Falkland, whose palace is closely associated with that of another Queen of Scots, Mary. Her first and last visits were both to Leuchars military base, where in 2018, as their Colonel-in-Chief, she presented the Scots Dragoon Guards with a new standard. Visits in between took in the broad spectrum of meeting with the communities of East Neuk, the former Royal Borough of Cooper and beyond, and to visiting the ancient University of St Andrews, a place of recent family significance. And I wish the Queen's granddaughter, Lady Louise, well as she commences her studies there, and I hope that she finds comfort in our town. The breadth of her engagements within North East Fife reflect her life, from leading her armed services to hearing from the smallest of children. Now, as a primary child of the 80s, the Queen meant brownie promises and royal weddings, with the Queen off centre as a happy and proud parent. I never had the privilege of meeting the Queen. My only connection is I was one of the last babies christened by the Reverend Keith Angus before he went to Crathy Kirk to become the Queen's chaplain in Scotland. It's been wonderful to hear from those members who have met her. The twinkle in the eye has come through strongly, although I've always wondered if, like Paddington, she could subject ministers to a very hard stare. I saw her once in person at the last Queen's speech she attended in this place, which took place during COVID. She processed past me down the Royal Gallery, supported by her son, our now King. And I conclude by saying that he and the rest of the royal family are in the thoughts and prayers of my constituents and I. God save the King.
Sir Charles Walker.
Mr Speaker, Broxbourne mourns the death of Her Majesty the Queen, but it celebrates her life of selfless service. Mr Speaker, quite simply, I join my constituents now in saying, God save the King.
Right. That was far too quick. Clive Efford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On behalf of my constituents of Eltham and myself, I would like to send my deepest sympathies to His Royal Highness King Charles III and his family on the passing of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. I think over the last few days we've identified a new syndrome, and I think it will be studied for years. I think it's the Queen Elizabeth II syndrome, because I felt I would be sorry for the nation at losing its head of state. I thought I'd be very sympathetic and sorry for the family losing a mother, a grandmother and a great-grandmother, but I did not expect, I must admit, to feel such a deep personal sense of loss, and I know others have expressed a same feeling. And if we reflect on the images that mould us, that make us British, if you like, and conjure those images to mind, it's the Queen's image that stands out most prominent. And if you think of those characteristics that we would associate with Britishness, strength, fairness, dignity, dedication, determination, duty, tradition, charity, those are all attributes that you would associate with the Queen in the way that she performed her task as our monarch. Characteristics she applied both home and abroad. She was the embodiment of how we would want to be seen in the world. Her longevity in her role gave her a deep knowledge and understanding of global politics and its personalities, which no other country benefited from. She saw politicians come and go. She reigned over 15 prime ministers, which is over a quarter of the prime ministers we've ever had. Similarly with presidents, so 13 presidents and 6 popes. She was determined to lead by example each and every time she stepped out in public. The generation that she comes from, the war generation, is a tough generation. Her experience of that gave her the insight to know exactly what message we needed during the COVID pandemic. She knew through our collective endeavour that we would get through. And that beacon that she set at the end of the road, which I think will be etched forever in the rock of our nation, we will meet again. Her generation knew loss in the darkest of hours, and her dedication to duty told her that at her darkest of times, she must lead by example. And she sat alone, wearing a mask, obeying the rules, at her husband's funeral. I don't think I admired her more at any other time. She didn't waver in her duty. And it's not fair to say to those that will follow that we won't see her like again. Our king has a hard act to follow. So I say, God help the king.
Harriet Baldwin.
It is with great humility and sadness that I rise to pay tribute to Her late Majesty the Queen on behalf of my constituents in West Worcestershire. When we think of the sadness that we are feeling, we can only imagine how much grief her family members must be feeling, and we send them our heartfelt condolences. I think so many of us had hoped that Her late Majesty would live to reach her 100th birthday like her mother did, and that she would have to make the decision as to whether or not she sent herself a telegram. But during her reign, Her late Majesty made 4 official visits to Worcestershire, most recently during her Diamond Jubilee tour, when she opened her faithful city of Worcester's new library, The Hive, and it was an honour to meet her on that occasion. On her first visit to Worcestershire in 1957 as the reigning Queen, she came to Malvern to see the Royal Radar establishment and Malvern College, because radar was invented in Malvern and had played such an important role in us winning the Second World War. And as many colleagues have said, she took a particular interest in our working here in Parliament, invited all new MPs to meet her after the election in 2010. And it was at that occasion that I learned of her fondness for Malvern water. And since then, I think many of us have always thought that perhaps it was Malvern water that had given Her Majesty her wonderful complexion and also helped her enjoy such a long life. Many tributes have made clear how close her relationship has been with this Parliament. But as chair of the British group in the Interparliamentary Union, I wish to highlight her role supporting international parliamentary democracy, human rights, and the rule of law around the world. The Interparliamentary Union brings together almost the whole of the world's parliamentarians, and as our head of state, she opened 3 of the organisation's conferences in London. In 1957, in 1975, and notably the centenary conference of the IPU in 1989. And as she addressed those hundreds of parliamentarians from around the world, she underlined the core values of multilateralism, the importance of bringing parliamentarians together to find peaceful methods of solving disputes and to understand each other. So let this time of grieving reinforce the wisdom that lasting peace must come through words. Our late Queen is now at peace, and in the words of our daily prayer in this chamber, may she attain everlasting joy and felicity. God save the King.
Gareth Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to rise in this debate to pay tribute to Her Majesty the Queen on my own behalf, but also particularly importantly on behalf of my constituents in Harrow West. The Queen was a remarkable monarch, loved and admired, as many in this House have already underlined, across our great country and indeed across the world. As a result, I have not been surprised by the depth, the warmth and the sheer volume of heartfelt messages that my constituents have shared about the Queen's life and their sense of loss at her passing. Harrow indeed was the first borough created by the Queen after her coronation in 1953. And that is probably the most important of the many reasons why we have always been the most important part of London ever since. She visited our borough many times, many school visits in particular, and to celebrate the borough's Golden Jubilee in 2004, and was always enormously well received. I had the privilege too of meeting her, as others have done, on a couple of occasions, once as a new Member of Parliament at a reception in Buckingham Palace for young achievers, which is probably the nearest I've ever come to being a rising star. And I met her too as a minister in the Foreign Office. And what was obvious on that occasion, and indeed in the many conversations that I had with ministers across the Commonwealth and the globe, was the enormous respect in which she was held, and her quiet work receiving and meeting diplomats and the leaders of the countries with whom our country needed to engage with was always enormously well received and hugely important. Indeed, many of my constituents who have links to India and to Pakistan or to across East Africa, in particular Tanzania, Kenya and Uganda, or those with links to West Africa, such as those with background in Ghana, and of course those with a background in the Caribbean, talk of the immense respect they have at a personal level, but also of the immense respect that their families and relations back home in their countries also have too. Hers was a remarkable life, Mr. Speaker. 70 years of phenomenal public service as our monarch. Her skills, her constancy, and her considerable diplomatic efforts helped underline and enhance the greatness of our country. And the warmth of the tributes from leaders across the globe, from across the Commonwealth and across Europe, and indeed from the President of the United States, have only underlined her importance to our country too. God save the Queen. God save the Queen, and God save the King.
Yeah. Geoffrey Clifton Brown.
Mr. Speaker, it is an honour to be able to give a tribute on behalf of the people of the Cotswolds with their many connections with the royal family. Ever since Her Majesty the Queen made that public broadcast when she was only just 21, pledging a whole life of service to the nation, she has honoured that to the full. She ruled unstintingly for over 7 decades, bolstered by her sense of duty, Christian faith, and, as others have said, her sense of humour. The rock, the constant for the nation, always wise and comforting counsel. The first British monarch to visit Northern Ireland for 100 years, to visit the Republic of Ireland for 100 years, and West Germany in 1965, she was indeed a world-class diplomat. She was an important leader of the Commonwealth, as my honourable friend has said, and during her reign, the Commonwealth has increased from 7 members to 56 countries, a legacy which we should strive to build on. A true countrywoman, she liked nothing better than to ride on her horse in her earlier days or walk her dogs. She took a keen interest in nature and understood agriculture. She loved horse racing. The Queen visited Cirencester in 1963 to view the revamp of the marketplace. She then visited the Royal International Air Institute at Fairford to celebrate the RAF's 90th anniversary in 2008. She was one of the most influential and important figures in the 20th and the 21st century, a truly great Queen who united all in every part of this nation, the Commonwealth and beyond. Our sympathies go out to all members of the royal family. She's now at peace with her beloved husband, Prince Philip. God save the King.
Yeah. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to speak on behalf of my constituents in Worsley and Eccles South to say, first, that we are deeply saddened by the death of Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. She has been the monarch throughout my lifetime, and this loss feels like losing a member of my own family. She was devoted to the service of the nation for 70 years, and she served our country and the Commonwealth with great commitment, deep devotion and dignity. My constituency of Worsley and Eccles South lies within the city of Salford, and one of our most famous artists, L.S. Lowry, was one of the official artists at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. His classic work from this momentous day is called The Procession Passing the Queen Victoria Memorial. In October 2000, the late Queen officially opened the Lowry Theatre and Art Gallery in Salford. During her visit, the Queen greeted staff and volunteers from the Lowry and spoke to local school children who had created an exhibition of photographs about life in Salford. His Royal Highness Prince Philip was the first Chancellor of the University of Salford, and the Queen supported him in his role as a dedicated and active Chancellor during his 24-year tenure at the university. In 2012, during her Diamond Jubilee tour, the late Queen opened Media City, the home of the BBC and ITV Granada in the north, as well as other media service companies, and the media base of the University of Salford. And it was an honour for me to meet the Queen on that occasion. The late Queen's last visit to Salford was in July last year. She met actors and members of the production staff at the Coronation Street set in Media City in celebration of the show's 60th anniversary. Now, as the Shadow Minister for Civil Society, I know that many charities hold the late Queen Elizabeth II in very high esteem. She was the patron of over 600 charities, military associations, professional bodies, and public service organisations, and tributes have been pouring in from many of these over the last couple of days. The late Queen's patronages cover every area of the charity and voluntary sector, from charities for young people to the preservation of wildlife and the environment. The values she possessed of selfless public service, compassion, and leadership encompass the spirit of our civil society. In her Christmas message of 2016, Her late Majesty talked of drawing strength from ordinary people doing extraordinary things, volunteers, carers, community organisers. And she said, "On our own, we cannot end wars or wipe out injustice, but the cumulative impact of thousands of small acts of goodness can be bigger than we imagine." Her own thousands of acts of goodness will be remembered for generations. I know her legacy will continue to live on in the thousands of charities and the volunteers dedicated to supporting communities across the UK and around the world, and that King Charles III will continue the traditions of selfless public service, compassion, and leadership. God save the King.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Towards the end of yesterday's proceedings, participants were encouraged to avoid repeating the points of their predecessors. This is no easy task when such unanimity prevails. Now, some members of this House clearly had far more contact with Her Majesty than others. Yet it's natural that so many of us wish to record our tributes to the outstanding monarch of the modern age, not simply for ourselves, but on behalf of tens of thousands of constituents who also adored her. One reason for that adoration was the Queen's accessibility. The Lymington Times has helpfully listed 4 notable visits she paid to our part of Hampshire, including in 1979 to mark the 900th anniversary of the New Forest, and 2012 as part of her Diamond Jubilee tour. Multiply those visits by well over 600 constituencies, and the scale of her efforts on visits alone is seen to be colossal. New Forest East was formed before the 1997 general election, and as its first MP, I described to the House how even so beautiful an area had been touched and toughened by the impact of war. Princess Elizabeth's formative years were similarly shaped and strengthened by that ordeal. Her family's involvement with the services, already so strong, could only increase. Whilst others directed the operations of the military, the allegiance of those forces was to her and her alone. This is more than symbolic. It's an essential guarantee of the constitutional independence of the military. I'm very fortunate to represent so many people with past, present, or potential service in the armed forces of the Crown. One such constituent, my partner's father, received his Distinguished Flying Cross from the hands of the Queen as long ago as 1955 during the Malayan emergency. He was struck by the depth of her knowledge even then. It went far beyond the formalities of an investiture. We can truly be thankful that at the top of society, she chose to be its servant. She adapted to change, yet always seemed the same. She did her duty unfailingly and was, in short, an inspiration to the nation.
West Street.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to follow so many others in rising to pay tribute to Her late Majesty the Queen on behalf of the people of Ilford North and the London Borough of Redbridge. The depth of our sorrow reflects in part the length of her reign, her lifetime of service and duty, and the devotion she gave to her family, our country, and our Commonwealth, but it also reflects how special the woman beneath the crown was, at once the head of our royal family, and yet able to touch the hearts of every family in the land. East London holds a special place for the royal family in our hearts. During the Second World War, King George VI and his family stayed in London during the Blitz and visited families whose lives and livelihoods had been devastated by the Nazi onslaught. The then Princess Elizabeth visited Ilford to see those affected by the bombing on the day after VE Day in 1945, and returned again in 1949 to see the 1,000th council home that had been built by Attlee's government. She is said to have remarked, and I quote, "Of all the houses and estates I have visited, Ilford's are the best." She also visited a care home where one elderly resident was so thrilled to meet the princess that they immediately burst into tears of happiness. I saw a similar outpouring of emotion when the Queen visited Ilford again for her Diamond Jubilee in 2012, where she unveiled a plaque to the dry garden created in her honour in Valentine's Park, which spoke to the great challenge of climate change, a cause close to the heart of our dear King. One resident told the Ilford Recorder, "We have always read about queens and princesses in the storybooks. To have the Queen in our neighbourhood, it's like a dream come true." A dream come true. It's a sentiment I can't imagine being elicited by a mere president, and one that was certainly elicited with no effort from Her Majesty the Queen, and it hardly seems real that that dream has ended. We are privileged to have lived in the second Elizabethan age. Her late Majesty the Queen oversaw our country's transition from empire to Commonwealth to a modern democracy. We're witnessing huge social changes throughout her lifetime. So many of my constituents are proud of those changes and, of course, retain strong familial bonds right across the Commonwealth. She showed by example that tradition and modernity are not adversaries, but well-suited companions, from Her Majesty's first televised address to her very last Zoom call. And from the beginning of her reign, amidst rationing and post-war reconstruction, to her address to the nation at the height of the COVID pandemic, she reminded us that whatever the triumphs and disasters of our history, our country's best days now lie ahead. History, like life, moves on. His Majesty the King has told us that the grief of the nation, indeed the grief of the world, has provided comfort to his family for their irreparable loss. I hope he knows that his presence in our lives in recent days has been comforting and reassuring too. And if I may say, Mr. Speaker, that when the Queen welcomed the then Duchess of Cornwall into her family, the nation took her into her hearts, and it is a privilege and pleasure to see her take the place as Queen Consort. We are blessed to have known the reign of Elizabeth I, our greatest Queen. May God rest her soul, and may God save the King.
Before I leave the chair, can I remind members and staff there is a service tomorrow at 6 p.m. in St Margaret's Church for Parliamentary Community to remember Her late Majesty the Queen. Those wishing to attend, please contact my office. Will Quince.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is with great sadness that on behalf of the people of Colchester, I rise to pay tribute to Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. Her Majesty dedicated her reign to serving our country and the Commonwealth. In her lifetime, she witnessed our nation and the world transformed immeasurably. Yet for so many of us, she was the constant throughout our lifetimes, her warmth and her smile, providing stability and reassurance during the very toughest of times. Her service to the British people and her presence in our lives will be forever held in our hearts and in the hearts of people across the world. On behalf of the people of Colchester, to His Majesty King Charles III and the royal family, I send our sincere condolences. And to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, we send our thanks, our admiration and our love. May you rest in peace, Mum. God save the King.
Yeah. Nick Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I mourn Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's passing. On behalf of my constituents in Blaenau Gwent, I offer my heartfelt condolences to the royal family. When I heard the sad news, my first thought was that we, the British people, have lost our preeminent public servant. As Her late Majesty once said, I do not give you laws or administer justice, but I can do something else. I can give my heart and devotion to these old islands and to all the peoples of our brotherhood of nations. Queen Elizabeth dedicated her life to the greater good and wove together the ties that bind us. In 2012, the late Queen visited Ebervale. It was one of those days in our valleys when the skies emptied gallants. But still, she saw through the programme. Her late Majesty knew that meeting our community, hearing our choirs, collecting flowers from children, being with us, mattered. She showered goodwill on the people of Blaenau Gwent as the heavens rained down on all of us. In the days following, the Queen also visited Aberfan. She was due to open a new school in the village, struck by grief just 46 years earlier. On reflection, I now realise she was the constant, was there when tragedy struck, standing alongside us when our nations mourned, but also she was there to usher in the new beginnings. As I look to the future, I think of His Majesty King Charles III. Now, when Prince of Wales, I recall his visit to Ysbyty yn Eiryn Bevan, the hospital named after one of my predecessors who established our National Health Service. Whilst very carefully done, there was a nod to the political genius who established yet another great institution of our country. I also remember the King wore a blue cornflower in his buttonhole. It was a classy look. He clearly knew of our great valleys and their history. I have no doubt he will continue the legacy of his beloved mother, the late Queen. Finally, I would like to warmly welcome the naming of the new Prince and Princess of Wales. Amen. Madam Deputy Speaker, though I mourn our longest reigning monarch, I now say, God save the King.
Yeah. Robert Halfon.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In 2015, I was appointed Deputy Chairman of the party and attending Cabinet, and no one had informed me that I would be made a Privy Councillor. My constituency office got a call saying I needed to attend the Palace, and I said, I replied to my caseworker, there's just a nutter on the phone, just ignore it. This happened on 2 or 3 telephone calls, and it was only on the day itself when I was told a ministerial car would be picking me up to take me to Buckingham Palace that I realised, and sadly I would have bought a nicer suit had I known. But it was the greatest honour of my life, and of course I sadly was not able to kneel because of my legs. but the Queen, Her Majesty, did not bat an eyelid, and I thought, there am I, the son of an immigrant to this country, becoming a member of the Privy Council, and I thought to myself, what an honour and what a meritocratic country that we have become. And now, the Queen, I'm very proud to be here representing my constituents of Harlow, of Hastingwood, Matching, Nasing, Roydon and Shearing, and the Queen visited Harlow in 1957, and Harlow is a new town, and it was built after the war to provide people from homes, many of whom came from the East End of London, and she attended and had a wonderful visit in the Market Square, and the BBC featured that in one of their documentaries over the past couple of days. And what it symbolised was, although that the Queen came from the old world, she was bringing in the new world, and she was showing that actually this is what the new Britain would be about post-war: beautiful new towns, bringing hope, aspiration, achievement, opportunity and community and dignity to our country. And these were all the values, of course, that Her Majesty represented. Just finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am a Jewish MP, and I was brought up in the United Synagogue, which is traditional Judaism. Every single part of the service is in Hebrew. And not being the best of learners, I mostly don't understand a lot of what is going on. But the one part of the service is that is in English is the prayer for the Queen. And if I could just read that, it says, "May the Supreme King of Kings, in his mercy, preserve the Queen in life, guard her and deliver her from all trouble and sorrow." The one part of the service every week that is said in synagogues in the land is prayer for the Queen. And it made me very proud whenever I attended synagogue that I was able to say that prayer. And the Queen embodied everybody, not just her Christianity, a deep Christianity, but everybody of all faiths, Jewish people, Muslims and Hindus and many other faiths. This week the synagogues will be saying not a prayer for the Queen, sadly, but a prayer for King Charles. And the rest of the prayer says, "May he put a spirit of wisdom and the understanding into her heart, into his heart, and into the hearts of all her counsellors, that they may uphold the peace of the realm, advance the welfare of the nation, and deal kindly and justly with all the house of Israel." On behalf of the Jewish people in our country, those of the Jewish faith, but also my constituents of Harlow, Hastingwood, Matching, Nasing, Roydon and Shearing, God save the King.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise on behalf of my constituents of Central Ayrshire to express our sympathies to the royal family and to pay respect to Her Majesty for her long service of 70 years and 10, literally a biblical lifetime. Being from Northern Ireland, for me, her greatest contribution was to peace and reconciliation on the island of Ireland, both by bravely welcoming Martin McGuinness here in London, but also her state visit in 2011, which brought so much healing. Madam Deputy Speaker, this debate has already woven the most important part of any funeral, the eulogy, and reminds me of the traditional wakes I grew up with the coffin lying in state in the living room, surrounded by family, friends and neighbours. What struck me then as a little girl was how the sadness gave way once the funny stories started, once the embarrassment, the talk of someone being on a chair in Blackpool singing at the top of their voice. These embarrassing stories changed the whole mood in the room that I observed as a 5, 6 and 7-year-old. The sombre tones were replaced by laughter, but strangely, the coffin often also turned into a coffee table, covered in glasses. Now, I don't think Her Majesty is likely to face that indignity, but I remember my uncle saying that he aspired to being buried in a coffin with ring marks, because it would be a symbol of a really good wake,
one that accepts that death is part of life, and one that celebrates not a life ended, but a life completed. In the same way, this chamber has been lifted by so many funny stories that demonstrate Her Majesty's great sense of fun, both in public, such as the stunt at the Olympics or with Paddington Bear, or in private, many that we've heard from honourable and right honourable members today. But the most illuminating are those which show how she used humour to put people at ease, out of kindness. I think she's probably delighted at the sheer amount of laughter that has been in this chamber over the last 2 days. And having walked the last journey with many of my patients over a lot of years, I know that virtually all of us would choose to die peacefully at home. And that's exactly what the Queen did. So we should take comfort from the fact that she ended her life peacefully and quietly at home in her favourite place, Balmoral, surrounded by her family and loved ones. It doesn't get better than that. So while we offer our sympathy and condolences to her family in their sorrow at her loss, for her we should be glad. She goes to her rest, welcomed once again into the arms of her beloved Philip, and no doubt already sharing a wry joke, and probably at our expense. So for Her Majesty, I simply pray, may she rest in peace.
Kelly Tolhurst.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise on behalf of my constituents of Rochester and Strood. I want to extend my deepest condolences to the royal family. Her Majesty's death is a terrible loss for us all and has touched every corner of the world. Her Majesty was a constant reassurance present, and the world is unrecognisable from the start of her reign. Despite these changes, she was a steadying figure who led this country from the aftermath of the Second World War to the country we are today. Like many people in this House, I have only lived under her reign. And as a female born in 1978, I was lucky to be born into a unique era for this country. Growing up, when for the first time in our history, we had both a female head of state and a female prime minister. These powerful female figures at the top of our country, so for me, it was absolutely normal to see women leading. The Queen was a remarkable figure, an inspiration to many whose influence has shaped generations as the values that she has embodied, the sense of duty, public service, quiet dignity, epitomise her reign. She was a continuous figure, both in this country and around the world, who managed to exercise a calm and steadying influence over our country, even in its toughest times. Rochester and Strood has been blessed by many visits from Her Majesty over the years. I'm immensely proud of our royal history and the links we have with our late Queen. She made her first visit to Rochester in 1938 with King George VI, when she visited Short's Aircraft Works, and which was also followed in 1942 to the Royal Chatham Dockyard. I hope that I am right in saying that she liked what she saw in those early visits before her accession, which inspired many trips in the following years. In her capacity as Colonel-in-Chief of the Corps, she inspected the Royal Engineers at Brompton Barracks in 1968, one of her many visits to the barracks. She also opened the Royal Engineers Museum in 1987 and made her final visit there in 2016 to celebrate the 300th anniversary of the Corps of the Royal Engineers, and it was the greatest honour of my life to have met her on that occasion. I felt nervous, shared by everyone else who had met the Queen for the first time, and after overcoming the first hurdle of getting my curtsy right, I moved on to the next step of meeting Her Majesty. The handshake. There I was, just over a year into being an MP, standing in front of Her Majesty, who had just turned 90, worrying about the damage that I could cause her hand should I grip it too hard. I could not have been more wrong, as I failed to appreciate I failed to appreciate how years of experience had left Her Majesty skilled at administering a handshake as she took my hand firmly and released it before I could even take a moment. But also coupled with her great smile and the twinkle in her eye that so many have spoken of. The barracks was not only the place the Queen had visited on her visits to Rochester. She had been to Rochester Cathedral and even took a trip to our great Isle of Grain oil refinery in 1955. Following her 1942 visit to the Royal Chatham Dockyard, she returned to the site in 1984, where she was able to see the redevelopment proposals for the closed Chatham Dockyard, St Mary's Island. These are a few examples highlighted how committed and dedicated the Queen was to her people. She was totally devoted to the British people throughout her reign, and hundreds of thousands of people who met her felt at ease. Her absence will be felt around the world. My thoughts and prayers are with her family, and I know that King Charles III has the support of Rochester and all the good people to lead this country into a new era. God save the King.
Ellie Reeves.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This isn't just a time of national mourning. Our grief is shared the world over, a testament to the service and impact our Queen had. For 7 decades, she selflessly dedicated her life to service. She was an icon that meant so much to all of us, and who at times we felt we would never lose. Because so long was her service, her presence was sewn into the very fabric of our society, guiding our country above the fray of politics. Her unrivalled commitment and experience helping to lead our nation, keeping it steady no matter the political turbulence. In her quiet way, symbolising the commitment, selflessness and humility we expect from our leaders. The progress we saw globally during her reign in technology, culture and politics is unparalleled in history. But as an ever-present matriarch throughout, she assured us as the world changed exponentially. It is truly sad that we have now lost her. And whilst my words today cannot do a life of such dedication justice, the outpouring of tributes the world over is a testament to her place in our lives. Now our thoughts are with her family as they mourn. We all send them our condolences. And in my constituency of Lewisham West and Penge, we mourn her too. In June, we came together across the constituency to hold Platinum Jubilee parties. Neighbours coming together for the first time since the pandemic. Children playing in the street, people making new friends, all in her name. I was proud to help organise my Jubilee Street party. My 7-year-old son declared it the best day ever, and we raised over £800 for our local food bank. And one of my earliest childhood memories was seeing the Queen as she visited the pioneering St Christopher's Hospice in my constituency. Her support and that of the royal family made such a huge difference to their work. I know that I speak on behalf of everyone in my constituency when I say thank you, Your Majesty, for everything. The service, selflessness and humility. Queen Elizabeth II went above the call of duty, and for that we will always be grateful.
John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a privilege to join honourable members in paying tribute to Her late Majesty, not just on my own behalf, but on behalf of all the people of the Malden constituency. Many fine tributes have been given both yesterday and today, and so many honourable members have spoken of Her late Majesty's dedication, her commitment, her remarkable sense of duty, and her lifetime of service, which was always performed with dignity, compassion, and kindness. I echo all of those sentiments. It has been an extraordinary week, starting with the appointment of a new Prime Minister and ending with the accession of a new sovereign. I congratulate my right friend, the Prime Minister. I'm sure she will be grateful that her first audience with the monarch was with Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth. I'm sure that His Majesty King Charles will continue to provide advice and counsel, but my right honourable friend must be sad
but she will not benefit from the extraordinary wisdom and experience that Her late Majesty had in advising 15 successive Prime Ministers. Before entering the House, I worked for one of those Prime Ministers, Margaret Thatcher. She used to fix in her diary the only immutable engagement in 11 years, the weekly audience with Her Majesty. I suspect there were occasionally some quite robust discussions. She never spoke of what was said. But I do know that she immensely valued the experience of Her late Majesty and was hugely honoured when she attended Margaret Thatcher, her own 70th birthday party. A number of members have spoken about how they're asked in primary schools whether they've met the Queen, and I've had exactly that same experience. But I've also been struck on international visits when so many parliamentarians from across the world have spoken of their admiration of the Queen and envied the fact that we have benefited from having her as our sovereign. And we have seen that in the global tributes with Union Jacks and the red, white and blue across America, Brazil, the extraordinary display on Sydney Opera House yesterday, and of course the words of the President of France, a country that has not always had great relations with the British monarch, but who said, you have your Queen, we have the Queen. Madam Deputy Speaker, I, like many honourable members, or right honourable members, benefited from meeting the Queen as a member of the Privy Council, and I had the good fortune to accompany her on one occasion to the Cenotaph, which is one of the roles of the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. But it was her 2 visits to Malden, which my constituents will always value. The first in 1971 to mark the 800th anniversary of the award of the Charter to Malden by Henry II, and the second in 2010, which I was privileged to be able to take part in, when she visited Malden Salt before walking down the High Street to have lunch in the town hall. On that day, it seemed that the whole town turned out to celebrate her visit. Today, the whole town, and indeed the whole of my constituency, are once again united in mourning the passage of Her late Majesty and in pledging allegiance to King Charles III.
Greg Davis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there is nothing more important to a child than their mother. She provides the comfort, the security, the stability amidst the worries of the world, a person assumed by all of us to go on forever. And so it was with Queen Elizabeth, the mother of our country, our Queen of Hearts. The people across the 4 nations of the United Kingdom owe so much to Her Majesty the Queen for providing steady continuity over war and peacetime through the peaks and troughs of change. So we feel a sense of deep grief across our United Kingdom, the loss of our eternal mother. For me personally, I feel a special affection as my own mother was of the same generation and met my father during the war when he served in the Royal Navy. Elizabeth, of course, bore the weight of the United Kingdom on her young shoulders from the age of 25 when Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister, over 70 years of global change. She's been an anchor for Britain in a sea of change through 15 Prime Ministers, 14 US Presidents and 7 Popes, supporting the world with the long-term interest of her communities and nations in mind, not the short-term expedience of others. As a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, she had to lead a family, often in personal turbulence in the public view, with a steady hand, carefully balancing the interests of the country with those of her own family. I had the privilege of meeting her briefly on behalf of Swansea West on a few occasions since 2010, and in those fleeting moments could appreciate her wisdom, the quiet gravity amidst a sunny demeanour, whatever the weather. She will remain loved by so many millions for so many things. Her continuity has helped anchor our fundamental values of fairness and democracy amidst the undulating changes of political leadership and the storms and sunshine of global events. We shall never forget her, and the people of Wales and Swansea West We'll always hold her in our hearts for the service and devotion to our country. Our thoughts are, of course, with the Queen's family, wishing the strength at this most difficult time in the comfort of remembering, with love and affection, happy times shared together as a family with Elizabeth, who will continue to live in our hearts. And finally, for Swansea West, I recall how on the 14th of May 1946, Elizabeth, at the tender age of 20, attended a recital of poetry at Wigmore Hall with her mother, Queen Elizabeth, and sister, Princess Margaret. There, Dylan Thomas, Wales's greatest poet, born, of course, in Uplands, in my constituency of Swansea Hill, read out Fern Hill, the last verse of which reads, "Nothing I cared in the lamb-white days that time would take me up to the swallow-thronged loft by the shadow of my hand, in the moon that is always rising, nor that riding to sleep I should hear him fly with the high fields and wake to the farm forever fled from the childless land. Oh, as I was young and easy in the mercy of his means, time held me green and dying, though I sang in my chains like the sea. Diolch yn fawr, Elizabeth, rest in peace, God save the King and the Prince and Princess of Wales."
Just a quick reminder to colleagues that Mr. Speaker has asked if remarks could be confined to 3 minutes so that we can get as many people in as possible. Ian Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for this opportunity to pay tribute to Her late Majesty. In an interview yesterday, the Mayor of Milton Keynes, Amanda Marlowe, was asked what Her late Majesty meant to the people of Milton Keynes. And she replied simply, "She was everything." And that is partly due to the fact that Milton Keynes, as we know it today, was founded, built and flourished as a new city during her reign. From becoming a collection of North Buckinghamshire towns and villages to the thriving city we know today, Milton Keynes developed under Her late Majesty. And she visited many times, both to celebrate our history, whether that was to visit the railway works at Wolverton, which has been home to the Royal Train for many years, or to Bletchley Park in my constituency, where she visited about 10 years ago to unveil a memorial to the codebreakers there. And members who've had a royal visit will know that these are often planned to the last minute, if not second. Such was our interest, and that of the late Duke of Edinburgh, that the timetable went completely out the window. She was so engrossed in celebrating the achievements of the codebreakers. But as well as our history, she was there to celebrate our development, whether that was the opening of the Open University, our new city centre, or the football stadium. Every part of Milton Keynes' development she has been there for. But the greatest honour came just a few months ago in the Platinum Jubilee, when she had the grace to bestow on us city status. And at the heart of our bid was the fact that Milton Keynes is made up of many different communities from the vast majority, if not all, of the countries in the Commonwealth. And that, of course, is something that she enormously cherished. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I noticed yesterday that in his fine speech, the Leader of the Opposition quoted some lines from Philip Larkin, one of her poet laureates. And I would just like to conclude by quoting a very short poem from another of her poet laureates, Sir John Betjeman. It's called The Last Laugh, and it reads, "I made hay while the sun shone, my work sold. Now, if the harvest is over and the world cold, give me the bonus of laughter as I lose hold." And I very much hope that Her late Majesty did keep her much well-known sense of humour to the end, and that once the period of grief and mourning at her loss has passed, that we may all, as individuals and as a nation, smile and remember with joy what she meant to us and did for us. Thank you, ma'am. God save the King.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise on behalf of myself, but also of my constituents in Lancaster and Fleetwood, to pay tribute to our longest-serving monarch. Underpinned by her Christian faith, she gave a life of service and built on that firm foundation, and for that we give thanks and celebrate, in the words of the King, a life well lived. The Queen owns the Duchy of Lancaster, so she's always had a strong tie to my constituency, and to us in Lancaster she's known as the Duke of Lancaster, which can catch visitors out. So if anyone is ever invited, Madam Deputy Speaker, to sing our national anthem in Lancaster, the words are slightly different, as we sing God Save the Duke instead of the more traditional words, which can catch, as I said, visitors out. And because of this strong tie, the Queen visited many times. She visited Lancaster Priory in 1999 to mark the 600th anniversary of this important link between the Crown and the Duchy of Lancaster. And she also personally approved the grant of a charter which constituted the University of Lancaster back in 1964. And she made many visits to Lancaster Castle. In fact, she visited Lancaster Castle 3 times. In 1969, before I was born, in 1977, before I was born, and in May 2015, literally days after I was elected as the Member of Parliament. So when the declaration was made and you were handed an envelope as a newly elected member, I got an additional envelope which says in a few days' time you'll be meeting the Queen, do you have a hat? And I don't think they meant the Barrow AFC bubble hat. Utterly terrified, before I'd made my maiden speech, I found myself stood just by platform 3 at Lancaster Station as the royal train rolled in, and rather unusually in Lancaster, which is normally gloriously sunny all the time, the heavens opened and it poured with rain. And at that point I realised that hundreds and hundreds of my constituents were stood out in this pouring rain, lining the streets to welcome Her Majesty in the hope of perhaps catching a glimpse. And that, to me, really brought home the power that the Queen had to bring people together from all walks of life and all generations. And to be honest, as a newly elected MP, that was an important lesson for me to realise too. But she also visited other parts of my constituency, Madam Deputy Speaker, from the rural farms to the renowned Russell School in Fleetwood in 1994 to mark its 150th anniversary. And from the correspondence that I've received in the past 48 hours, it's clear that my constituents who had the good fortune of meeting her now have memories that will last a lifetime. So as the sun sets on this second Elizabethan age, we give thanks that our nation has had the good fortune to have the Queen serve us for 70 years. May she rest in peace and rise in glory. God save the King.
John Glenn.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise to speak today on behalf of my Salisbury constituents. And I would like to start by acknowledging the unique contribution that Her Majesty has made to our nation, the Commonwealth and the world. We will never see a monarch reign through so many decades. And the overwhelming grief, sadness and disorientation that our nation is now experiencing is in proportion to and a direct consequence of the enormous role that Her Majesty played in our lives. And as King Charles said in his moving address last evening, thank you, Queen Elizabeth, thank you for your gracious presence in our lives. Now, many of her subjects will never have met the Queen, but everyone felt that they knew her and that she cared for them. And I have sat in this chamber these last 2 days and heard so many wonderful speeches from colleagues across both sides of the House. And I was moved by the sheer breadth and depth of the impact that Her Majesty has had in every corner of her United Kingdom and beyond. Much has been said about her devotion to her family, her love of the countryside, horses, her beloved corgis, her humour, her kindness, and the enduring impact of that remarkable smile that warmed the hearts and left an indelible impression seared into the soul of anyone she encountered. Now, I cannot offer anecdotes from time spent at Balmoral, Sandringham, or encounters at the Palace. But I feel no less privileged for that. Nonetheless, I did meet Her Majesty when she visited Salisbury in 2012 in her Diamond Jubilee year. She visited the Rifles Regimental Museum in the Salisbury Cathedral Close, our cathedral, and an exhibition of our country's history and communities on the cathedral lawn. And the abiding memory I will have is one of a sublime peacefulness, an aura of sincerity as she engaged so generously in so many conversations with my constituents. And each morning, when in my constituency home overlooking, I'm so fortunate, the great cathedral, and as I reflect on the day ahead, looking out of my window, I have two pictures on the window ledge. One of my beloved parents and one of me shaking the hand of Her Majesty a few metres away. I met her but once, but I think she will always be with me in my service in Salisbury. Her Majesty led a life that was animated and fueled by a deep Christian faith that sustained her through life's highs and lows. I think this will be the strongest legacy that she will leave me with. Her life was driven by duty, but sustained in full submission to the gospel of Christ and his teachings. And I thank God for what he showed us about his character through Her Majesty's wonderful life. God save the King.
Chris Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise on behalf of my constituents in the City of Chester. And what is so telling to me as I listen to honourable and right honourable members across the House is that amongst the grief and amongst the sadness, there's laughter and there's smiles. The Queen had that ability to make us smile and to make us laugh, and it's something that is so important to remember today. For me, two factors stand out for me on the death of Her late Majesty. The first is the fidelity she gave to that pledge she made in Cape Town on her 21st birthday to dedicate her life to service. Never in history can a promise have been kept so faithfully for so long. She embodied dignity, service, and dedication. Secondly, I must think of the royal family and the personal loss that they have felt. The fortitude they are showing, especially our King, at a time of bleak bereavement, is a clear sign of the fine man he is and the fine King he will be. And I noticed how quickly he connected with people yesterday when he returned to Buckingham Palace. May he and his family take comfort from the shared grief that the whole nation and the Commonwealth is feeling. Her Majesty, as many have said, was the rock of certainty and reliability around which the maelstrom of an ever-changing world would circle like a hurricane, a beacon of hope, a fulcrum of dependability. From the post-war austerity, through the swinging 60s, the permissive society, the space age, globalization, the age of the internet and the World Wide Web, and the coronavirus pandemic, she saw it all, she moved with the times, but she also acted as an anchor of stability and security in the storm of the changes in the world saw. She came to Chester in June 2018 to open Story House, our new theatre and arts centre. The whole city was bouncing and buzzing. She, the Lord Mayor and a couple of others crammed into a small lift to go up to the upper floors of our new theatre. "Doors are closing," said the automatic voice of the lift. "Yes," said Her Majesty, "I think we can all see that." And again, it's one of those examples of her using a little humour to put everyone at ease, particularly in that tight space of the lift. And I'm so grateful that in Chester and across the realm, we were able to celebrate the Platinum Jubilee earlier this year so that she could see the love and the gratitude of all of us for that life of service. May she rest in peace. God save the Queen and God save the King.
Heather Wheeler.
Thank you very much for calling me, Madam Deputy Speaker. I, along with most people in South Derbyshire, am so sad that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth has left us. I, on behalf of the constituents of South Derbyshire, send our heartfelt condolences to the royal family. We have been so lucky in most of our lifetime to have had a Queen who has been totally dedicated to public service and duty. Queen Elizabeth showed us, public servants, how it should be done, and she remains an inspiration to me, as she has been for so many other people. I was lucky enough to have the honour of meeting her twice, once in Derby and once in Buckingham Palace. Both moments I will cherish for the rest of my days. At Buckingham Palace, I was with my dear departed husband and spent a wonderful evening chatting with Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. All around us were buckets catching raindrops from a dodgy roof, which gave me the opportunity to share our mutual grief over leaking roofs and different ways of trying to fix them. Probably not a conversation many others have had with the Queen. She was amazingly knowledgeable on this subject, as on so much else. To close, Madam Deputy Speaker, our constitutional monarchy and its ability to adapt and change with the times is the envy of the world. None of us politicians are more important than our monarch. Ministers come and go. Whilst the continuity of our monarchy provides us with an important balance of power, of which I am proud. May our beloved Queen Elizabeth II rest in peace, and long live King Charles III.
Sarah Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to rise today to pay tribute to Her late Majesty on behalf of my constituents in Cheshire and Amersham. As we know, the late Queen came to the throne having seen the torment and consequences of war at a time when she was still grieving for a much-loved father and consoling her own mother. We are honouring someone who epitomised service and fulfilled a promise made over 7 decades ago. I know I'm not the only one humbled by her continued adherence to that promise throughout her extraordinary life. Here was a woman who had a talent for connecting with people, even if they'd never met her. One constituent told me how he can remember waving flags as a young child at her coronation in 1953. And this year we came together once again to celebrate her Platinum Jubilee. Indeed, the person who lit the beacon in Chalfont St Peter was chosen from the select group of people who had lived in the village consistently since the Queen came to the throne in 1952. Attending those Jubilee events, it was absolutely clear just how well loved Her late Majesty was throughout Cheshire and Amersham. I was told of her visit to us in 1985 as the patron of the Epilepsy Society, greeted by a group of 1,200 school children. Another constituent got in touch this morning to share his memory of witnessing the Queen going to thank Lord Salisbury for organising the flotilla on the Thames. He said, "I saw a rough, tough forester with tears streaming down his cheeks, mothers and children hugging after exchanging a few words with Her Majesty, and she bestowed a cheeky grin with a shrug of her shoulders on me just before climbing into the helicopter." It is these fond and often deeply personal memories that so many people have to share that is so striking. Whilst we remember Her late Majesty, I am mindful of the fact that His Majesty, King Charles, has come to the throne whilst grieving for his mother. I hope the knowledge that His Majesty's loss is shared by so many brings some comfort to him and the royal family. May she rest in peace, and God save the King.
Vince Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise to express my deep condolences to the royal family and those members of the royal household on the death of Her Majesty the Queen. On behalf of my Mid-Sussex constituents, we are all deeply thankful for her life of remarkable service. Her encouragement, her grace, her fortitude and her warmth simply cannot be matched. And a true inspiration both here and across the globe, as we've heard. And the fact that she reached across the generations, supporting people young and slightly older, capturing the mood and always steadying as a presence in those good times and sadly in the more bad times.
And we don't have enough words of thanks that can cover that deep affection and devotion that we have for her faithful and impeccable public service, and the commitment that she embodied and that we try to reflect in some small way. And it was again on display earlier this year as we all came together across Mid-Sussex for street parties, for concerts, church services to celebrate her Platinum Jubilee. And as reflected on earlier in the contributions, growing up and onwards to serve as one of her ministers, her constancy and support of the Queen was always there. And growing up as a child in the 80s, in fact, a speaker in the chair who was a female, and Lady Thatcher, it seemed perfectly normal to have female leaders around us. I didn't actually notice there was lots of other men, but there we go, there's another story. Our Queen was absolutely there and by our side and always with us, and came to our county most recently in November 2017, but it was in Mid-Sussex back in March 1999 when she formally opened the Triangle Leisure Centre in Burgess Hill with the Duke of Edinburgh, and visited the Town Council and the Help Point. Now, many constituents have special memories of meeting the Queen, receiving a card or a letter or perhaps an honour for their contribution to the nation and our local community. And I, unlike other people, have only caught a glimpse for her. As a reporter, I reported on her coming to neighbouring or other constituencies, but I caught a glimpse of her back in 1984 in my neighbouring area where the South of England show is held. But also, we do remember that she's across the land on plaques in every single constituency where people she met and gave comfort to or supported. And very often I remember conversations with my grandmother about her, and the conversation was, what would her handbag look like and what colour would she be wearing? Would it be teal or green or cornflower? She seemed to dress for the occasion, a fashion icon as well. As I conclude my thoughts, the constancy and dedication that has been shown is reflected in her son, our new King. His work with charities will continue in his son, our new Prince of Wales. And at this time of deep personal sorrow, we wish him well, and our new Prince and Princess of Wales. He's had a long apprenticeship, and we look forward to seeing him shine. God save the King.
Florence Ashalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise to pay tribute to Her late Majesty the Queen. Like many other people, I had the opportunity to meet the Queen. As a councillor, I attended the annual garden party at Buckingham Palace in 2010 with my late mother. My mother, like most British Nigerians who speak Yoruba, remarked that she's going to meet Iya Charlie, which translates to Charles's mother. And she proceeded to phone all her family members across London and Nigeria to tell them the good news, she's going to the palace. I remember seeing some of the other guests at the palace and seeing how good it was to see so many members from the Commonwealth represented, all dressed in their national dress and uniform. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the one thing that the British Nigerian diaspora in the UK enjoy, in addition to our culture and hard work and education, is a good party. And I remember my mother's face when she was presented with sandwiches and cakes at the garden party, because according to Nigerians, an event cannot be called a party without jollof rice. When I saw the Queen coming towards my mother and I, my mum said she was going to ask her about the food options, and the horror on my face, because I thought I could see the headlines in the Daily Mail already. Councillor from Brixton kicks off at the garden party. I pleaded with my mother not to ask her about the catering options, and I said we would stop for KFC on the way home. My constituency of Vauxhall is home to so many people from around the Commonwealth who are in Britain for a variety of reasons. But the one thing that stands unique of their vision of this country is the presence of the late Queen Elizabeth. The Queen is fondly remembered across Vauxhall. Long before air travel was common, King George VI and the royal family, including the young Elizabeth, would often depart for their visits from Waterloo Station in my constituency, including a royal visit to Canada in 1939 and the royal visit to South Africa in 1947. In March 1967, the late Queen opened the Queen Elizabeth Hall at the South Bank Centre. And in 1977, she unveiled a plaque to celebrate the new gardens created for her Silver Jubilee. Jubilee Gardens. The Queen returned to Vauxhall to officially open the transformed gardens on the 25th of October 2012 during her Diamond Jubilee year. And the gardens, which sit as a backdrop to the London Eye, continues to be one of London's most much-loved public spaces. The Queen was a representative for our country like no other, and she represented our country like no one else. The Queen had an unwavering commitment to public service for over 70 years, and despite the level of scrutiny she was under for long of her reign, her peerless dignity and leadership meant that she always acted as a source of pride. It was a pride felt by so many people who were always asked when they travelled abroad about the Queen, a pride felt by those who've become British citizens while taking the oath of allegiance. Now we must welcome King Charles III to the throne, and I know from his visits to Vauxhall and his personability and dignity, he will follow that long tradition. Psalm 62, verse 5 to 6 reads, "For God alone my soul waits in silence, for my hope is in him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress, I shall not be shaken." The Queen was not shaken. Eternal rest grant unto her, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon her. May she rest in peace.
Victoria Atkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thursday, the 8th of September 2022 was the day we all knew must come, but hoped fervently somehow would not. The waves of sadness that we all feel, as well as the individual acts of remembrance and contemplation, reflect the respect and love we feel for her and acknowledges how she shaped our modern Elizabethan age. Her late Majesty was our constant. From wise words and a wry smile in her Christmas addresses to succour in times of distress such as the pandemic, and in our day-to-day lives, her image on our banknotes, our coins and our stamps, her late Majesty was not just the keystone of our Constitution, she was also stitched into the rich tapestries of our own lives. I remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, the news at 10, watching the news at 10 with my grandmothers who were of her generation, and there would be commentary, fierce commentary, on the clothing worn by Her Majesty on a particular visit, but everybody would agree that she always looked wonderful in bright colours, as my honourable friend has referred to earlier. We have a proud heritage of royalty in my constituency of Loughton and Horncastle. Since 1066, the King's Champion has held the feudal manor of Scrivelsby. The role of the King's Champion is to gallop into Westminster Hall on horseback in full armour, to throw down the gauntlet, that is where the phrase comes from, to challenge any newcomers to the incoming monarch. I am very much hoping that King Charles III is going to reinstate this particular tradition. We also are the birthplace of King Henry IV in 1367 at Bolingbroke Castle, and in 1643 there was a very important battle, the Battle of Winceby, where the parliamentarians beat the royalists, but perhaps we'll gloss over that. But there is also RAF Coningsby, which Her Majesty, late Majesty, visited in 1976. This is the home of the Typhoon fast jets. They are the heroes that fly up into our skies to protect us at very short notice. But it is also the home of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. They are the historic planes that formed the part of any flypast over Buckingham Palace. We saw them in their joy in the recent celebrations of Her late Majesty's Jubilee. And they include Spitfires, Hurricanes and Thumper, the Lancaster, one of only two remaining that can fly in the world today. And we know from those pictures of Her Majesty on the balcony the joy that those flypasts used to give her. And so I'm incredibly proud that my constituents have played their part in bringing her such happiness. So on behalf of my constituents, I give thanks for her extraordinary public service over 7 decades, and also for the more private acts of kindness and humour and humility that we've heard in recent days in this place and on television. But as we mourn the end of this great Elizabethan era, we look to the future and with hope to the reign of King Charles III. He will lead our nation and indeed the Commonwealth with the same devotion and skill as his beloved mother. He has our sincerest condolences for his loss, our admiration for his steadfast composure in assuming the crown in the midst of his grief, and our heartfelt thanks for his quiet determination to serve our nation as well and devotedly as his late mother. God save the King.
Yeah. Fabian Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Right Honourable Member for Sutton Coldfield said something that I think chimed with all of us, and that is when we visit primary schools, what is the first question the children ask us? And it is that, have you met Her Majesty the Queen? And so I was asked the same question by Chapel Allerton Primary School in my constituency, by St Paul's Roman Catholic Primary School when I was there recently. My right honourable friend, the member for Pontefract and Castleford, said, Her Majesty the Queen will always remain the forever Queen. And I was reminded of that when my younger daughter Ruth told me yesterday that when she went to school following the death of Her Majesty, one of her 6-year-old pupils said, but she's been the Queen all my life. My daughter